Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down.
Alright, here we are, folks.
Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in us. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we're gonna light it up tonight. We're gonna light it up tonight. We're gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We're gonna light it up now.
Welcome back once again. This is Chris Report, and he assured me that Simon's down in Boulders. Folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa. Well, we're back, folks. Monday, May 20th, 2024. And the Constitutional Court has reached a conclusion that Jacob Zuma is ineligible to serve in Parliament. Well, that wasn't rocket science. Pretty easy to figure out. Section 47 of the South African Constitution as much as says as much. So there you have it. Now, this has been a bit of drama over the past several weeks as the Electoral Court has interjected itself into the discussion. And this is in response to the Independent Electoral Commission declaring that Jacob Zuma could not compete to serve in Parliament. Now, it's pretty simple. Anyone who's convicted of a sentence of 12 months or more is ineligible to serve in Parliament for a period of 5 years after that conviction. Pretty simple, not rocket science. That was the determination by the IEC, because that's what the Constitution says. Zuma, MK, and Talon Bezuidenhout went to the Electoral Court to get that judgment overturned. Now, the Electoral Court said that, in fact, he had a rescission and that he's not convicted and therefore he can serve. That's utter nonsense, total fabrication of reality. We knew this. We said so at the time. I told you. And it was pretty clear that Jacob Zuma could not be serving in Parliament. If you can't serve in Parliament, you cannot be president, because the way that South Africa works is on a parliamentary system, not a republic. It is a fake republic. A republic masquerading. It's a parliamentary system masquerading as a republic. People don't vote for members of parliament. Nobody votes for the president in South Africa except members of parliament. That's a parliamentary system. When you have a legislative body that selects who the president's going to be, that's the same as having a prime minister in effect. So, if you can't serve in the parliament, you cannot become president. Because they select amongst their members. Although some have argued that anybody can be picked to be president from anywhere in the country. I don't know about that. I'll have to do a little research on that one. Some have made that argument. Kind of like you can pick anyone to be a Speaker of the House of Representatives here in the United States, even if they're not in Congress. That's been the argument to pick Donald Trump to be Speaker of the House. I don't know how valid that argument is either. But whatever the case is, Zuma has been declared ineligible by the court. And this is not exactly rocket science. We expected this to happen. This is not a surprise at all. And the one surprise here is Justice Leona Thrawn delivered the unanimous judgment herself today. Now, Leona Thrawn is, of course, famous because during the judgment against Jacob Zuma at the Constitutional Court on June 29th of 2021, she opposed the judgment that he was in contempt of court. Now, I don't know what planet she lives on, but clearly Jacob Zuma was in contempt of court multiple times. And so I don't know what her deal was, but she opposed that. And she famously said that. Now, interestingly enough, about a week or two ago, she came out and said publicly that the Electoral Court, she doesn't see how the Electoral Court could possibly reverse a judgment of the Constitutional Court, given that the Constitutional Court is the apex court, the highest court in the land, akin to our Supreme Court here in the United States. So, how in the world does the Electoral Court come up with a conclusion that contradicts what the Constitutional Court did? Well, it can't. And ultimately, that's why the Constitutional Court today, in a unanimous judgment, determined that Jacob Zuma is ineligible. He cannot stand for the MK party. Well, again, not a shock to me. The surprise to me is that it's actually taking effect. That is interesting. Section 47, paragraph 1, subparagraph E of the Constitution disqualifies anyone who is convicted of an offense and sentenced to more than 12 months imprisonment without an option of a fine from serving in the National Assembly. Now, it also adds a part about no one may be regarded as having been sentenced until an appeal against the conviction or sentence has been determined or until the time for an appeal has expired. So, if you're convicted of a crime, you may appeal it. But when you're convicted by the Constitutional Court, there is no higher authority. Are you going to go to God, to Yahweh, to Allah for an appeal? No, there is no higher authority. The authority is the Constitutional Court. Therefore, it's a moot point, which is what I said all along. As is Dalian Pofu's comical legal maneuver to claim that Cyril Ramaphosa's immoral, unjust, illegitimate remission of Zuma's sentence, along with 15,000 other convicted criminals because of prison overcrowding, just as the rescission decision is moot as well. It's not even germane. It doesn't matter if you have a rescission or a pardon or whatever. Nothing like that is mentioned in the Constitution. A conviction is all it takes. So, how smart were the Constitutional Court on June 29th of 2021 by sentencing him to 15 months? A lot of people said that was too short. Some people said it was crazy they even got convicted. But the bottom line is that because he was convicted of more than 12 months, that made him ineligible to be in Parliament this time around. Did anyone foresee him running for Parliament this time? I don't know. But what is clear is that he will remain on the ballot. Jacob Zuma is on the ballot. They've been printed. There's no change. His ugly mug, his shower head, will be on the ballot for the Mkhonto weSizwe party, even though he can't serve. And MK has already said they're disappointed in the outcome, but he remains the brains behind MK. Jacob Zuma is the brains. Ladies and gentlemen, if Jacob Zuma is the brains behind your operation, I submit to you that you have a very dodgy operation, to say the least. Excuse me. Laughing too hard, throat getting sore there. Anyway, yeah. Now, as I said, Zuma and the MK party appealed to the Electoral Court after the Independent Electoral Commission had declared that he was ineligible. The IEC then appealed the Electoral Court's decision saying that Zuma is eligible, which he's not, and they did an urgent appeal to the Constitutional Court. Now, many wondered if the court was going to have the courage to actually reach a judgment before the elections in 9 days. Well, they did. They did. And what I have to say is that it takes courage to stand up to the potential backlash that this is going to lead to. There will be a backlash. Whether it's violence or not, that's a whole different story. But there will be a backlash to this, and it takes moral courage to stand up to that sort of thing. That's the bottom line here. So this is courage in the face of fanaticism, absolute fanaticism. MK is founded on a cult of personality, the cult of Jacob Zuma. No different than the economic freedom fighters. They exist solely on the cult of Julius Malema. And if they want to continue as a viable party after his departure from the party, which will eventually come, then they're going to have to become something other than Julius Malema's fanboy club. And the MK party is the fanboy club for Jacob Zuma. Now, shockingly, even though he has very little support amongst political leadership in the African National Congress, the Rubes who vote in South Africa are something akin to a fanboy club for Cyril Ramaphosa, a man who does not deserve any support whatsoever. Cyril Ramaphosa is the worst president in the history of South Africa, even worse than apartheid-era leaders. He's really, that's going to shock some people when I say that. But the man has overseen the racialization, the criminalization, the ostracization of South Africans based on race in a more demonic fashion than the National Party ever did. They were clear about it. He tries to proclaim that it's right, moral, and just. That is not something that the National Party could ever get away with, convincing the majority of the population. But Sir Ramaphosa convinces a significant portion of the population, if not a majority, that it's okay to steal from white people and brown people because, we were cheated. It's okay to attack these people and sing songs of violence against them because, we were marginalized. I don't know who we is, Sir Ramaphosa, because we doesn't include over half the population, about 60% of South Africa or more at this point, were born since your corrupt kleptocratic party has taken control of the country. And it was led, of course, by none other than Jacob Zuma, the man who is ineligible to serve in Parliament. Now, what I should mention here, folks, is that I don't think any other analyst has mentioned this yet, but I will say this. Reading the law, that statute applies for 5 years. 5 years. You cannot serve in Parliament for 5 years after you've been convicted. Well, he was convicted on June 29th of 2021. Doing the math, adding 5 makes it June 30th of 2026. Now, given the fact that members of Parliament are planted there by political parties, not by voters, you don't pick who sits in Parliament. They come up with a list, and they pick their favorites, and they put them in Parliament, and they're supposed to represent you. What a corrupt system that is, I'll tell you, folks. Anyway, given that's the case, assuming Jacob Zuma has a pulse, what comes in 2 years' time? In June of 2026, 2 years from today. Will Jacob Zuma be appointed to Parliament to fill a vacated seat by a member of the MK party? We shall see. That would be interesting. Yeah, they should use stickers to cover his face at the voter station. I would agree with that. That's a good idea. Yep. Anyway, it takes moral courage to abide by the law. Now, the purpose of the Constitutional Court and Supreme Court of Appeal, which is a lower level above that, or below that, and the U.S. Supreme Court is to be the neutral arbiter of decisions and actions to ensure that they comport with the Constitution. That is your ultimate task. So the reason I say this is that, for instance, the Dred Scott case in the United States. In 1857, Dred Scott was a free man who was taken by slave traders and sent to the South and enslaved there. Now, Dred Scott, this went all the way to the Supreme Court, the Dred Scott decision, and the court determined that Dred Scott was property under the Constitution, and therefore, now, I don't know what they said about the kidnapping, but therefore he could be, I don't remember if he was free and escaped, whatever the case is. But he was taken by slave traders from Indiana, if I'm not mistaken, back to the South, and he was imprisoned there as a slave. And the court said that the Constitution declares him to be property, and therefore his freedom is not germane. Now, that's an immoral assessment, but it's a legal assessment. It was in line with what the Constitution said. By the same token, in 1896, I believe it was, Plessy versus Ferguson in Louisiana over a streetcar, the court found that separate but equal accommodations for black and white people was legitimate. The problem with that, of course, is that flies in the face of the 14th Amendment, which has the Equal Protection Clause saying that all people are equal under the law. That's funny. All people are equal under the law? Certainly not Donald Trump. He's not equal under the law. Conservatives aren't equal under the law. They are the targets of rabid, vile, disgusting leftists who will criminalize any behavior, including a woman who was just sent to prison for 5 years in a federal penitentiary for sitting on a sidewalk. Yeah, not obstructing cars, not harming anyone, not threatening anyone, but sitting on a sidewalk outside of an abortion clinic, and wasn't even blocking access to the clinic, but using a vile, repressive law passed by a Democratic administration years ago. The federal government now has put this woman in prison for 5 years as a convicted felon for trying to save the lives of unborn children who are being murdered at the hands of demonic crap weasels. Yeah, this is a world upside down. So a degree of reason returns to South Africa today with Jacob Zuma now being declared ineligible for office. Simple as that. Well, thank you, CFG, for subscribing. Do appreciate that. Don't know what's going on with YouTube, but I keep getting buffering on my end over here in my studio. Anyway, must be busy internet today, folks. MK spokesman says they don't care. Zuma will still be on the ballot, and they will change the Constitution. Yes, jokey atheist, they will not change anything. They are actually delusional. The MK party actually believes that they will win two-thirds majority, 66% plus one of the vote in this election. Are they insane? The ANC is bad. It will do poorly, but it won't do that poorly. And the opposition isn't going anywhere. The opposition will get 25 to 30% of the vote, regardless of what MK does. So what about the EFF? The EFF is going to get 10 or 11% of the vote. So that's 30 or 40%, and they think they're going to get 66. They already can't get 66% just from that alone. So it's just delusional on the part of MK. These are not serious people. They're just troublemakers, just loudmouths, kind of like we have here in the States, sitting on college campuses, queers for Gaza, gays for Gaza, Gaza, and they have no idea. Israel out of Gaza. Well, listen, folks, Israel left Gaza in 2005. Israel attacked Gaza. No, Hamas attacked Israel. It invaded a sovereign state and murdered and butchered 1,200 people in an orgy of bloodletting. And they're paying a price for it. Must be a two-state solution. Well, Israel, under Prime Minister Ehud Barak in the 1990s at the Oslo summit, offered a two-state solution and even offered for mutual governance of Jerusalem. And a consequence of that was that Yasser Arafat and Palestinian leadership don't want a two-state solution. They simply want to eliminate the Jews and chase them out of their homeland, a land that has been Jewish for over 5,000 years. Interesting. Want to chase them out of there. The Palestinians are simply Arabs, who the Romans called Philistines, Palestinians. Anyway, there you have it. Gays for Gaza is as stupid as saying chickens for KFC. Exactly. That's right. Chickens for KFC. Exactly. Gays for Gaza. There's some really stupid people in this world. And the problem is they're loud and they're violent, and that's the problem. Authorities lack the moral courage to do what's necessary. And in this case, authorities have done what is necessary. Jacob Zuma has been declared ineligible for Parliament, which is what the law says, and that's what should happen. Let's take a look at some of the headlines that are floating out there now, including CNN. Even CNN is reporting on this. In fact, I'll lead with that. CNN reporting on Jacob Zuma being declared ineligible. They're usually a day or so slow to report on events in South Africa. But here we have CNN saying Zuma not eligible to run. Wow, look at that. South Africa's apex court has ruled, when it says, okay, first off, when you see a story like this, South Africa's apex court, that's not American speaking. We don't say apex court. We say the Supreme Court or highest court in the land. So even if it's constitutional court, we say the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court. So this is clearly a South African who wrote this and sent it to CNN, one of their stringers or somebody they paid for this story. The South Africa's apex court has ruled that former President Zuma is not eligible to run for parliament in the general election. The unanimous ruling capped months-long speculation and legal wrangling on whether the former leader of the ruling ANC, turned thorn in its side, and public face of a rival party would be able to stand for the country's top legislative body. Yep. He was found guilty of contempt of court by the same court that now declares him ineligible. We welcome the judgment, and we think it's well-reasoned. A contempt of court sentence is an extremely important sentence, and it's a sentence that cannot be treated lightly. Constitutional Court has reaffirmed this, said Nishan Baltan of the Ahmed Kafandra Foundation on local television. Now, the MK party said it doesn't change anything. He's still on the ballot. It doesn't stop him from leading the party. Leading the party? He's not even a member of the party. How does Jacob Zuma lead the party? He's still a card-carrying member of the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. How many political parties can he belong to? I think that's a fair question. How many political parties do you belong to? News 24 came out with this. It's the first place I saw it earlier today. News 24, Zuma not eligible to become a member of Parliament. The Constitutional Court rules. Look at that smug smile. Well, not anymore, Jay-Z. Justice Leona Thrawn delivered the unanimous judgment penned by herself Monday morning. There you go. That is the News 24 business day. Jacob Zuma not eligible to be MP, rules the Constitutional Court. Section 47 of the Constitution bars individuals sentenced to prison for longer than 12 months without the option of a fine from becoming a member of Parliament for 5 years since completion of the sentence. Well, it's not the judgment, it's completion of the sentence. So that's interesting. Now, that will raise a whole new question. And technically, I think that Jacob Zuma will be okay if it's completion of sentence, because his sentence was in remission, there was a remission of it, then the date that the remission took place should be the date that he's eligible. So it won't be in June or July of 2026, but when was that? What was September, October, when the remission occurred? So if that's the case, then that would be the date he'd be eligible to go back to Parliament. Yep. The order of the Electoral Court is set aside and replaced with the following. The appeal is dismissed. The counter application is dismissed. There is no order as to cost in this court. Wow. There you go. Crazy stuff. And then the Times Live, Jacob Zuma is not eligible to become an MP according to the Constitutional Court. The news reports are all over this. Kanyesile Nkobo says that former President Zuma's bid to make a return to Parliament was scuppered on Monday when the Constitutional Court ruled he was ineligible to stand for election and uphold the Electoral Commission of South Africa's urgent appeal. Yep, there you go. Remember, Justice Thrawn, who did not want to convict him of contempt 3 years ago, penned this argument, this judgment, and delivered it today. Constitutional Court overturns the Electoral Court decision according to the independent line, and Zuma is no longer eligible for election in Parliament. We knew that. The Constitutional Court Monday overturned the Electoral Court decision and ruled that former President Zuma was not eligible to run for this election. But he could run in the future, folks. Jokey Atheist asked a question. I'm curious. I heard some people reporting they plan on appealing the ruling. Surely it cannot appeal. Who will they appeal? As I said at the beginning of this, Joking Atheist, who exactly can you appeal to? That's why it was a moot point about the clause in the Constitution, Section 47, that you must be given an appeal. Well, it's a moot point because there is no higher authority. Whom do you appeal to? Yahweh? Allah? God? There's no one to appeal to. The highest court in the land is the Constitutional Court. Case closed. Not germane, not relevant, not useful. Yep. Wayne Zany Uzuma. Yes. MK party's disappointed, but Zuma will be on the ballot. Of course. And look, folks, that's when we get to what's the outcome of this in just a moment. Why don't they televise Trump's trial, Salem's Cave? Because trial broadcasts are set by state governments. Not every state allows the broadcast of trials. That's why we still have many court artists who draw scenes. Not every court is allowed to be made public. So I don't know the status of New York, but apparently that must be the case, that they can't show it in New York, and that's fine. I don't think we need to sit here and watch the court or watch court trials of Donald Trump. The bottom line is it's not a legitimate case. We know that. There's no legitimacy to it whatsoever. And here's the most important part. We are about to reach closing arguments, and the prosecution is yet to reveal the purported second crime that makes the charge crime actually a crime. Without the second element, it's not a crime. So unless they plan to disclose that second element in their closing arguments, then they will not have presented a case of a crime having been committed, and therefore an acquittal would be mandatory. And if it's not, then the judge must set aside a directed verdict and anything that comes out with anything other than an acquittal. If they do introduce the second element of purported crime during closing arguments, then this has to be a mistrial, because the defendant has no opportunity to present witnesses or defend himself against a charge leveled against him in the prosecutor's closing arguments. I mean, this is a Soviet-esque witch trial. It's no different. This is what happened to the Hungarians in 1956. They were tortured and beaten, members of the government, until they came into court, and it was recorded, but it wasn't live for the public. It was recorded, and they admitted their crimes against the state, and they were summarily executed. Yeah. That's what we got going on here. It's interesting you call yourself Salem's Cave, because this is like a Salem witch trial is what this is. Yeah, so despite Jacob Zuma having been removed from the ballots, Mkhonto weSizwe Party Secretary General Sile Nkubane said it does not change the former president will be on the paper. Well, that's what they wanted. I mean, whether Zuma's in parliament or not really isn't the issue. And that's why, let's get to what now? That's the question of this broadcast. So what now? Zuma's ineligible. So what now? We know famously that on June 29th of 2021, I predicted there would be mass violence and chaos. I didn't know the magnitude was going to be as bad as it was in KwaZulu-Natal at a minimum. And I predicted it'd be around Nkandla and spread to other parts of KZN. And of course, I did so on June 29th, a full 10 days before the violence broke out in South Africa, and warned people as we approached that date. But of course, South African police, crime intelligence, national intelligence, the South African National Defense Force, the intelligence minister, the police commissioner, Kamala, none of them prepared for these events. Henty Craig just subscribed. Thank you for that, Henty. Bye, donkey. None of them prepared for those events. As I counted down and warned people. Go back. The videos are still there. I told people it was coming. Again, the only thing I got wrong was the magnitude. I had no idea that it was actually going to be organized the way it was, or that the state would intentionally ignore the events unfolding in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal for days on end. Remember, of course, that Jacob Zuma or Cyril Ramaphosa every day, instead of addressing from June 9th when the trucks were attacked on the highway and lit on fire, 100 trucks owned by black businesses were lit on fire, and that launched the whole civil insurrection on July 9th after midnight. Remember that? By the toll plaza, by the Muy River toll plaza. Remember that? Well, for 3 or 4 days after that, Cyril Ramaphosa, all he said was, wear a mask, wear a mask, you must wear a mask. He completely ignored the events unfolding in the country as it went up in flames. Now, that situation is very different than today. The MK party today simply wanted Zuma's face on the ballot so people would vote for it, because they don't think voters are that bright. They think most voters are pretty stupid, and oh, look, it's Jay-Z. Vote here. That's all they want. They want to get as many votes as possible. Whether he sits in parliament or not really isn't an issue for them. I mean, as a party in parliament, they can invite him to parliament, speak anytime, and it's up to the speaker of the parliament to approve that or not. But he can be the guiding voice or power behind the party. But again, how many parties is Jacob Zuma a member of? He's a card-carrying member of the South African Communist Party, a member of the African National Congress, and he was standing for parliament. Now he's ineligible for the MK party, even though he's not officially a member of the MK party. What's really going on here? So, that said, I do not anticipate widespread looting, burning, and chaos that we saw before. Now, are the police prepared? Not much better than they were in 2021, although they claim to be prepared for the elections, but they need to be prepared for this decision, not for the elections. They need to be prepared for both. So, I don't think that the police are anywhere near as prepared as they should be for what's coming. Now, there will be intimidation, no doubt, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and in the mining hostels of Gauteng, where lots of Zulu are at. There will be intimidation and arm twisting to get people to vote for the MK party and for the ANC. For that matter, folks, in Limpopo, we had EFF and ANC members pull out firearms and start shooting at each other in an event trying to get people to vote. These are not legitimate parties. Members of the ANC and the EFF pulling guns out, shooting at each other. People wounded, throwing stones at each other because they're campaigning. This is a replay on a milder scale of what we saw in KwaZulu-Natal in 1994 before the election. Pre-election violence is ramping up now. We've already seen people shot yesterday in Limpopo. Yep, I'll be reporting on that in the news hour when we get up at the top of the hour, 1 hour from now, when we do the news. We'll be talking about that story. So Zuma is ineligible, and the MK party is not losing its mind. Now, if the MK party come out with a very terse and strong statement against it, it might be a different situation. But basically said, yes, the court, we're disappointed. The court has said President Zuma is not eligible to serve in parliament as an MK member because of the conviction, but he is on the ballot, and he will lead the party. So I think that will mitigate any potential. That doesn't mean it's impossible. There's always malcontents. There's always malicious actors out there of one sort or another. But the odds are pretty slim, I believe, that we're going to see the violence we saw previously. Now, different story come the announcement of the election results. If MK gets 2% and the ANC gets 48%, I think we might see some violence. Yeah, particularly in KZN. People will scream that the election was stolen. But here's the problem with the MK party. It is imploding, absolutely imploding. It has done no favor to itself. It's done nothing but a disservice to itself, the MK party. So that's a real problem. The MK party a month ago was surging, and the ANC was in deep trouble in KwaZulu-Natal and also in Gauteng. Pressure from the multi-party charter parties and from MK in Gauteng was really, really hurting the ANC. As it was, the ANC was in serious jeopardy of losing control of 3 provinces, the Western Cape, KZN, and Gauteng. I do know what the tea leaves say now. In Gauteng, it's difficult for me to predict that one because of the rapidly changing events. I suspect that the ANC will still lose Gauteng province. And I think it's going to be as a consequence of Action SA in Gauteng. The popularity of Herman Mashaba, the reach and influence of Action SA in Gauteng should be sufficient to get that party 4% or more of the vote in that province. And if it does, at the provincial level, it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact there. So the ANC could lose control of Gauteng because of Action SA. Now, not just because of Action SA, the DA, the Freedom from Plus, AC, all these other parties, but the impetus to push them below 50%, I believe, could be the votes that go to Action SA. Contrary to what many analysts say, and I said this early on because that was the case early on when Action SA first started, virtually every member, all the leadership, all the people flocking to the party were simply bum-hurt members of the Democratic Alliance. That's no longer the case. Action SA now has had a much broader appeal and is getting people from across the spectrum to join his party, in particular black voters. And if you get black voters in Gauteng, the most populous province of South Africa, that hurts the ANC. That really hurts the ANC. Now, the ANC will win provinces into perpetuity in Mpumalanga, Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and the Northern Cape. It doesn't matter how often they screw up, how many failures they have. And I'll tell you exactly the reason why parties like MK and ANC succeed. And it's not simply skin color. A lot of people say it's skin color. It's what people have been taught to do. They have been taught to do it. So, perfect examples when I was in Rietvlei last year, outside about 30 kilometers south of Rustenburg in Northwest Province. Taken out there by the Forum for Democrats and drove out there in my hire car. Man, I had to wash it after that. It was covered in dust. Taken onto a dusty dirt road. There is a community out there in Rietvlei that has been there since the 1980s. Now, the reason people moved there is that the owner of the land had a slate mine. They were digging slate out. Now, the slate mine has been in disuse since the early 1990s. Guess it wasn't turning a profit. Maybe people stopped using slate. I'm not sure. But the people who moved there were given permission to live in the land adjacent to the slate mine by the landowner. And the people who owned the land back then apparently still own the land today. I believe that's the case. Anyway, the landowner has offered to sell the land to the Rustenburg municipality, which is not called Rustenburg. It's got a different name. Anyway, it's got a Tswana name. The municipality, controlled by the ANC every single day since 1994, has no interest in buying the land. They've never made an offer for it. They have no interest whatsoever. They don't care what the price is. Even if you gave it away, they don't want it. Why? Because they don't care. It's 30 kilometers from the town. There aren't enough votes out there to cause the ANC to lose an election. So what do they care? Now, for a long time, as part of service delivered by the African National Congress, the Rustenburg Council sent out a mobile clinic that actually visited the place. I think it was weekly. Maybe it might have been more frequently than that. Went out there for years. There's no money for that anymore. The ANC has stolen all the money. The country is falling apart. And so that thing was discontinued a long time ago, 18 months, 2 years ago. So there is no mobile clinic. So there's no medical care. There's no electricity. Eskom has never run all this talk about electrifying places and getting people in the grids. No one's ever run electricity out to Rietvlei. There is no running water, no ablution units. They used to truck water into them, but they don't do that anymore either. The road is not paved. There's no coal tar from the main road, which is a disaster in and of itself. I was worried I was going to blow a tire or break an axle on that road, but managed to drive on okay. The road going to Rietvlei, coming off the road going north-south, this one runs east-west, is not paved. It's just a bunch of dust. So the point I'm getting at is I talked to a lady out there, a go-go, and in Setswana. I greeted her, of course, but my Setswana is too rusty to go much further than that. So I had an interpreter, the lawyer who works for the Forum for Democrats, and I had her sit there and I said, "May I ask you a question, ma'am?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Do you vote?" I'm looking around. There's no water. There's no electricity. There's a couple of JoJo tanks here, but that's about it. I said, "No sewage, no jobs, no clinic, no road." I said, "Do you vote?" She goes, "I do vote. It's my civic responsibility." I said, "Well, I appreciate that, ma'am. It's my responsibility as an American. I vote in every single election as well. You should be proud of that." She goes, "I am." And I said, "Well, can I ask you another question?" She said, "Yes." I said, "May I ask, whom do you vote for?" And this is a very telling response. And this is why the ANC will get 5 million votes no matter what. No matter what. They'll get these 5 million votes for this reason. This was her response. I said, "Why do you vote for the ANC?" "Because I'm supposed to." Because I'm supposed to. The ANC has successfully used propaganda to lie to the population of South Africa for 30 years, convincing them that the ANC brought them freedom, which is the biggest lie since Joe Biden opened his mouth this morning. Now, the ANC did not bring freedom to anybody. They were but one bit player in a much larger kaleidoscope of events that unfolded from the 1980s to the 1990s. and they had virtually no impact on it, other than murdering Inkatha members in KwaZulu-Natal. Dice Gambino, EFF is going to get way more votes than most people anticipate. I don't think so, Sean. I don't think so. Hypothetically, if the election isn't free and fair, is there any recourse? Not really, Salem's Cleve. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if it's not free and fair? Our election wasn't free and fair. What was our recourse? We went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court violated the law. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court violated a law that wasn't a year old. So what recourse do we have? None. None whatsoever, folks. That's a shocker, isn't it? Yep. You're supposed to be able to go to the courts. We went to the courts, and the court violated the law. Act 77, approved on October 19th of 2019, signed by Governor Tom Wolf after an idiotic Republican legislature gave him this piece of legislation. Tom Wolf signed the legislation updating election law that hadn't been updated since the 1930s, and it required that all mail-in ballots go through the Federal Postal Service and that they be at the Board of Elections when the polls close. Any ballots that came in after that were null and void. For days after that, the state of Pennsylvania county officials counted those mail-in ballots, which is a violation of the law. Donald Trump had a 749,000 vote lead before those 1.2 million ballots were added to the total. Those 1.2 million ballots were invalid. Case closed. No argument. Now, not all of them were invalid because some of them had already been at the county and they hadn't counted them yet. But they had to count those ballots. So the ballots that came in after 8 p.m. on Election Day were not valid. The Supreme Court ruled that the state of Pennsylvania could count those ballots that came in for the next 3 days. That's a violation of a law that wasn't even a year old. Well, at that point, it was a year old. Yeah. So, I mean, what recourse do we have? We are but serfs. We are but minions inside of the Matrix. That's what's going on here. Yep. Yeah, ZANU-PF will ensure it's a free and fair election. Somehow, I don't think so. But once again, if you're just tuning in now, folks, I'm Chris Wyatt, retired U.S. Army Colonel, Africanist, sitting in central Pennsylvania, reacting to today's judgment by the Constitutional Court in South Africa that former President Jacob Zuma is ineligible for Parliament. This comes as no surprise to me and anyone who's cogent and can read the Constitution. Section 47 is quite clear on this. Jacob Zuma was convicted of a crime and sentenced to more than 15 months without the option, or more than 12 months without the option of a fine. Therefore, he's ineligible. However, his attorneys for the Mkhonto weSizwe party and for himself argued that to the Electoral Court that his sentence had a remission. In other words, he didn't have a 15-month sentence. But that doesn't change anything. Additionally, they said that the Constitutional Court erred anyway. So this went on appeal by the Independent Electoral Commission over the Electoral Court's head to the Constitutional Court. And today, Justice Leona Thrawn, who was in the minority when the same court convicted him of contempt of court on June 29th of 2021, today, in a unanimous decision, said he's ineligible. Well, there you go. That should not have been rocket science for anybody. Yep. So, News 24, the MK party said that Zuma will remain the brains behind deployment. How can he? Jabulani Kumalo has suspended him. MK party says Constitutional Court's decision to disqualify President Zuma from contesting his seat in Parliament will have no bearing on the party. Well, it does. He won't serve in Parliament. Former President Zuma does not have to be president. He is still the brains behind any president that will be deployed. So it does not mean that the president that we deploy will not be guided on how to run the country. You might as well see it as former President Zuma is still running the country, regardless of whomever becomes president, said party spokesperson Lamuolo Ndela. Well, these lunatics actually think that they're going to be the deciding vote in Parliament. Now, it's not impossible to believe that the MK party could have the deciding vote and actually get the president. I mean, the largest party doesn't have to have the president. It can be one of the supporting parties. One of the supporting parties in a coalition. So it is possible that the ANC-MK coalition after the election could pick an MK candidate be the president, but if it isn't Jacob Zuma, there's no way that the ANC is going to go with a candidate that does what Zuma says. So, of course, Zuma is just shooting this party in the foot. just recently. He spoke at Orlando Stadium over the weekend, their big Manifesto launch, an entire almost, well, it is a month late. It was supposed to be April 6th, and they wait until May 18th. May 18th. April 6th to May 18th, a month and a half after their manifesto was supposed to be launched. It was finally launched at Orlando Stadium. Of course, it was released the week prior, a month late, or 2 weeks late, something like that. Anyway, 3 weeks late. So at the Orlando launch, he said that we will get rid of the ANC and then we'll vote for the ANC. In other words, the people leading the ANC are counter-revolutionaries. And of course, in the words of one of my viewers who keeps popping on here, who is a dyed-in-the-wool ANC, I think he's just a paid troll supporter, he says that, of course, that Jacob Zuma is the counter-revolutionary. This is the mind-numbing idiocy and lunacy in the minds of these stalwarts, these fossils, these troglodytes, these old, decrepit septuagenarians, octogenarians, nultogenarians drug out by the ANC, who still have it in their mind that the apartheid state was everywhere. They were infiltrated everywhere and controlled everything, and you can't trust anybody in the ANC. They're all turncoats. Ah, my goodness. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Zuma is not eligible to serve in Parliament. Comes as no surprise to anybody who can read. No surprise whatsoever. Yep, but the MK party is whistling past the cemetery here. So, in a statement, the Independent Electoral Commission said the Electoral Commission had approached the Constitutional Court to seek clarity on whether it had powers to enforce Section 47(1) of the Constitution. So, does the IEC have the power to enforce it? It really isn't really relevant whether they do. They should have the power based on the Constitution, but even if they don't, the court has the power. So, the section is about persons who are eligible to be members of the National Assembly. Now that the matter has been settled by the highest court and given that the constitutional uncertainties have been clarified, the Commission can continue with final preparations for free and fair 2024 national and provincial elections single-mindedly without apprehension that the elections are susceptible to challenge. To avoid confusion, the Commission reiterates that the judgment will not affect the ballot papers for the 2024 national and provincial elections in any way. In other words, the photograph of Mr. Jacob Zuma will remain in the cluster of identifiers of Umkhonto we Sizwe party. The name of Jacob Zuma, however, will be removed from the list of candidates nominated by the MK party. There you go. So he'll be on your ballot. You can vote with his picture, but he cannot serve in Parliament. Comes as no surprise. Yep. Now, the Kathandra Foundation's Nishan Baltan said the organization asked to be a friend of the court, filing an amicus brief because Zuma should not have been allowed to contest the elections to begin with. Agreed. He said, from the outset, we thought that the former president should have never been a candidate. All our objections to him being a candidate were too late at the IEC because one of the first things that a member of Parliament will have to do is swear to uphold the Constitution. And when you do that, you don't then intend to defy the Constitutional Court. Well, here's the other piece of this, too. I mean, is the MK party even eligible to be on the ballot? We're waiting for this investigation from the IEC into alleged signature fraud by the MK party. Reportedly, the MK party has thousands of fraudulent signatures on the ballots. So, in order to get on the ballot. So that's yet to be resolved too. Folks, we could see a situation where the court will simply ignore this investigation or not complete it until after the election, for fear that if they do it before the election and determine that in fact the MK party fraudulently got on the ballot, then any votes for them are null and void, and they worry that that could be a contested election. But the bottom line is that if the MK party committed fraud, their appearance on the ballot is not legitimate. And people can vote for them all day, but the votes won't count. They'll be wasted votes. But every vote for MK is one less vote. That's the perfect outcome, ladies and gentlemen. That is the perfect outcome. Yeah, votes not going to the ANC, going to MK, and the ANC not getting the votes. Yeah, and then the votes being disallowed. So there's no MK members in Parliament. That would be interesting. That would be interesting. It seems to me that it will be a coalition government with the ANC majority. Stubborn ANC fans forgot about load shedding. Exactly, Salem's Cave, and that was exactly the intent of misuse of diesel and the lies being told by Kojisensa Ramakopa, the electric slide minister, and of course the ANC cabal, who are telling people that load shedding is ended not because the election's around the corner, but because we've solved the problem. We've been working on it since July 2022. Well, in 2003, you had the world's best utility, according to international analysts, better than any other public utility in the world. So how did you go from that? And by the way, apartheid was over. There were no white folks running ESCOM. They were all kicked out. There were no technicians. They'd all been sacked. So you talk about sabotage, you talk about Jan van Riebeck and Hendrik Verwoerd and apartheid and all of the things in colonialism. That's all horse manure, because you ran, it was considered the best, which you inherited, and then in less than 20 years, you turned it into an embarrassment of epic proportions. And of course, much of that occurred on the watch of none other than Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma, the man responsible for the destruction and decline of South Africa. But he wasn't alone. Lots of willing accomplices. Patricia de Lille, Ibrahim Rasool, the list goes on and on and on. Paul Matashile, Ace Magashule, Zandile Gumeda. The list goes on and on. Thabo Mbeki. Yes, they're all there. They're all guilty. The Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution's Lawson Naidoo said, "We welcome a clear and reasoned unanimous judgment of the Constitutional Court that provides clarity on the proper interpretation of Section 47, subsection 1, paragraph E of the Constitution." They were also a friend of the court filing an amicus brief. ANC President Ramaphosa said he notes the Constitutional Court's judgment. Yeah, he's probably just going to be pretty mute. He said the court has ruled, and as I've often said, that is the highest court in the land, and we have to give the judiciary the right to arbitrate dispute among us in terms of our Constitution. So they came out with a ruling, and I noted the ruling. He said that on a radio interview on 702 this morning. Well, let's see if he's so magnanimous when the national health insurance legislation is declared unconstitutional, null and void. Remember how he defers to the highest court in the land. Let's see what happens later on. Now, what's dangerous about MK Party is they want to do away with the Constitution. They want Roman Dutch law gone. They want African traditional law to apply. Of course, they have no codification or written version of that. They want all land stolen and redistributed to black people based on skin color, not based on who owns land or who had it. Yeah, they're a very dangerous party. Their manifesto is one of the most racist documents that you could possibly find. Read it. Read my analysis of it. There's a video on here. I don't know if one of my mods is here. I can tell you where that video is. I analyzed the MK manifesto when it came out on a Friday. It did over the weekend, and it was a racist screed, a black supremacist, frightening document that if you changed it from black to white and put KKK on it, people would actually believe it's a true document, because it's that racist. Hello from town with almost no drinking water, thanks to ANC and their buddies. Yeah, well, you've got cholera in Hammanskraal, just outside of Pretoria. You've got cholera in other parts of South Africa. The ANC has destroyed the entire country. They are a bunch of reprobates, and it's time for them to go, folks. It's time. The election is coming up, and you need to make it happen. You need to make it happen. So after this broadcast, were they really, or were they surging in the media? We don't know, Arctic. We don't know if they're really surging, because all we have is the media. I'm not on the ground talking to people, unfortunately, still waiting for my damn passport. So I don't have an answer to that question. I do not have an answer to that question. So James Bowie says Cape secession is the only answer. Well, you got to make it happen, don't you? I'll tell you what, if Cape secession happens, I'll consider seriously buying some property in the new Cape of Good Hope. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. All right. So that's the case. So here's a poll in News 24. Are you aware that there will be 3 ballots for the general elections? Well, duh, I am. I've been telling my audience that for weeks. Yes, and I know how each ballot works. I had no idea. Let me read up on it. I'm somewhat aware, but I'm not 100% confident. So I'll say yes, I'll vote, and let's see what the results are. Only 52% of the people were aware and know what ballots to vote for. 34% said they're aware but not confident. 14% had no idea there are 3 ballots when they walk in. So election officials are going to have a lot of work to do on election day. If 14% of the electorate, that is upwards of 2 million people, will have to be explained why there are 3 ballots. That's going to take a lot of time. It could be a very long day with 3 ballots and the way this is going. Andre Zedin, long time, donkey years, welcome back. So, again, making international headlines, even on CNN, the captured news network, Jacob Zuma declared ineligible to run for parliament, according to the Apex Court. Jay-Z is on the outs. The unanimous ruling capped a months-long speculation, legal wrangling on whether the leader of the ANC turned thorn in its side and public face of a rival party would be able to stand for the country's top legislative body. Once again, South Africa is not a republic in the sense that the people vote for the president. The president of the republic is really just a prime minister who is selected from among the members of parliament. That's how it works. Parliament selects him. Nobody voted for Nelson Mandela. Nobody voted for Thabo Mbeki or for Jacob Zuma or for Cyril Ramaphosa, except members of parliament. Pretty simple there. Pretty simple. So, anyway, folks, that's the situation on this day, 9 days before the election in South Africa. Jacob Zuma is declared ineligible. And the MK party is just, nonplussed by it, at least publicly. They're probably very angry and steaming and seething inside in their little kraals or they're in confab as they sit together and come up with machinations on what they're going to do on election day and what their plans are and how they think they're going to get 2/3 of the electorate. Dream on. Dreamweaver. But the bottom line is on the public face of MK, they're saying that publicly that this makes no difference. Jacob Zuma is the face of our party. He's on the ballot. You'll see his face, and you should vote for MK. That's the argument they're going to make. And frankly, given their situation, it's the best argument they could possibly make, and I understand why they'll do it. So what will happen now? A few weeks ago, a month ago at this time, it looked like the MK party was surging, despite the fact that it had no manifesto, it had no organization, it had no ground game, it had no rallies, it had nothing, no funding. Despite that, just because the face was Jacob Zuma, it soared to 25% of the electorate, according to the Brenthurst survey in KwaZulu-Natal, making it the largest party there. Now, since that time, we've seen the party be accused of fraudulent signatures to get on the ballot, and that's still being discovered or investigated by the Independent Electoral Commission. That happened. That's a lot of bad press. Then they ousted the founder, Jabulani Khumalo, from the party and others, claiming that they were trying to murder Jacob Zuma. What? So that brought ill repute on the party. And then Jabulani Khumalo suspended Jacob Zuma because he was suspended illegally. And then on top of that, Jacob Zuma has now finally been declared ineligible. So predicting the election outcome for MK is anybody's guess. It's a crapshoot. I mean, there's no legitimate basis whatsoever for any analyst to make a reasonable call at this point. We can make a wild guess, a swag. I could say that in KZN, he'll get 15 to 25% of the electorate. That's a guess. In Gauteng, maybe 8%, and the rest of the country, less. It's just a guess based on what information is available. But the conflicting, contradicting information and the rising and then collapsing fortunes of MK make this a fool's errand to make a projection. The only projection that I've made, which I stay consistently behind, is that the ANC gets between 38 and 42%. According to the media, I'm going to be wrong. Now, a month ago, the media had me spot on. The Brenthurst poll had the ANC at 38%. The Ipsos poll, a few weeks after that, at the end of April, had them at 40%. Now, the media are claiming across the board, most of the mainstream legacy media outlets are claiming that the ANC is going to get 45% or more. If they do, South Africa will continue to suffer. The ANC must be driven down to the 40% or lower mark. And I'll tell you this, if the ANC gets 39%, I'm not predicting that, saying that now, but if they get 39%, Cyril Ramaphosa is done. Done and dusted. He's finished. He's toast. He's gone. And that's the end of his nonsense. Yep. Yes, John Jarvis. Yeah, it shouldn't have been flying the weather, but that's the arrogance of people like that. More important than Zuma, who took out the Iranian president? Israel, CIA, or MI6? Tehran took out the Iranian president. That's who took him out. Yep. Yeah, the proof lies in the final count after the elections. Correct, Val, and that's why it's difficult to make a prediction. But I am sticking by my ANC. I made it, and there's no reason for me to back off of it, although I'm a little nervous that I could be wrong, given what's going on with the press, claiming that every day the ANC is ticking up to 45%. Wow. When that Brenthurst poll came out, I was like, this is too good to be true. I predicted this 3 years ago in 2021. Arctic says, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to see the report before I buy what story? What story are you talking about? What story? Anyway, yeah, so that's the situation today, the 20th of May, 2024, just 9 days before South Africa's potentially historic and momentous elections. We'll see. We'll see. We will see. Anyway, Jacob Zuma ineligible, MK party nonplussed, at least publicly nonplussed by it. They don't care. Nothing's going to change. Yes, helicopters can fly in pretty shitty weather with good pilots or using instruments or goggles. But, yeah, so we'll see. Anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up there, folks, or should we keep it going a little bit longer here on this story? Let me double check and see if anything new is broken out on this story since I covered it very quickly here. Let's see if anything else has come up on the wire. NBC is covering the story now. New York Times is covering it. BBC is covering it. Wow. NPR is covering it. It's getting all kinds of press coverage now. Now, this all happened in the last hour or so. 16 minutes ago for NPR. 49 minutes ago for NBC News. An hour ago for the BBC covering this story. Now, Euronews also covering it. The Telegraph has got it. The whole world is aware that Jacob Zuma is not eligible. Bloomberg, an hour ago. Sky News. That's yesterday's news, not today's. So, yeah, let's take a look at this. BBC, here you go. There's BBC saying that the top court has barred Zuma from standing in the election. Constitutional Court has ruled his 15-month prison sentence for contempt of court disqualified him. And that's the BBC. National Public Radio here in the United States says he's banned from running the election. Just 9 days before the election. Significant blow for Zuma and his new MK party, which is named after the former armed wing of the previous party. The MK was counting on the 82-year-old's popularity in his home province to boost their votes. And they'll still get the votes, I think. It was greeted by ecstatic crowds at Orlando Stadium in Soweto over the weekend. They surprised many in the polling consistently at 10% ahead of next week's election, mainly at the expense of the ANC. NBC News, ex-president Jacob Zuma disqualified from parliamentary election. There you go. Constitutional Court said the section of the Constitution disqualifying people from standing for parliament if they've been sentenced to more than 12 months without the option of fine does not apply to the 82-year-old. He was sentenced to 15 months. And here's the New York Times. Highest court says Jacob Zuma. See, that's what we'd say in American English, the highest court or Supreme Court, not the apex court. That's why the other story was clearly written by a South African. With elections a week away, the political comeback of the former president has presented a major test for the country's young democracy. Young? 30 years? How long do you get to be young? I guess you're young. We're a young republic, 250 years or thereabouts. Zuma resigned from presidency back in 2018 amid widespread protest over allegations of sweeping corruption within his government. 3 years later, he was convicted and sentenced for failing to testify at the public inquiry on corruption for the Zondo Commission. Euronews has a video. There you go. Former President Jacob Zuma. Look at that.
Prison and having to resign when he was last in office. At a campaign rally.
Yeah, get rid of that one. I don't want to get a copyright claim. And the Telegraph. They vow to win the South African elections. Petra Thornycroft and Ben Farmer are South Africans, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so they still think they're going to win. They've been telling South Africans they're going to get 2/3 majority. Only once in the history of post-1994, South Africa has a party gotten 2/3 majority. In 2004, the ANC got 69%, and they didn't use it to amend the Constitution. They didn't come up with expropriation without compensation then. They didn't come up with national health insurance then. They didn't come up with the Bella Bill then. None of this nonsense to suppress freedom when they had the majority. Now that they're on the outs, they keep trying to remain popular with what they think will bring them votes by oppressing South Africa's population. It's counterintuitive. Why are they wearing camo? Because they think they're soldiers. Forever young, yes? Americans involved in the coup in the Congo. What was happening there? I'll talk about that. They're not Americans. Let's get that straight, Light Rain. They're not Americans. They're foreign nationals who carry American passports because this country was foolish enough to grant them citizenship. That doesn't make you an American. When you are a foreign national and get a passport of convenience, that does not make you an American. Legally it does, but not morally. So don't start this nonsense that Americans were involved in this. These were Congolese who live in America and Canada, and they are the ones behind it. Anyway, folks, I'm going to wrap it up here with a big audience. I hate to go with 94 of you here, but wow. For those of you who'd like to hang around, this will be redirected for the top of the hour. We'll talk about the Iranian president. We'll talk about Jacob Zuma. We will also talk about that situation I just mentioned. All of that coming up at the top of the hour for Chris Wyatt Reports. This has been an analysis and summary of Jacob Zuma's ineligibility to serve in Parliament, something I've been telling you from the outset. So we'll see what happens. All right, folks, MK, nonplussed at the outcome today. We'll see you shortly. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the like button if you haven't done that already. Just 45 likes. Come on. Are there Zuma supporters here? Or are you just, even the party isn't upset? Hit that like button. It costs you nothing but a moment of your time. And I'll be back in 28 minutes for the news today. Thanks, folks. Cheers. Be safe out there.